bodies, I I think is actually thought-provoking, right? Like I've seen some conversation around the idea that there was like this intentional move to make white women the face of this administration and to do it in a way that is you're woefully unprepared. You maybe even are intentionally ill prepared um, to take the fall. And that is not a new dynamic for white men.
Ooh, that's very interesting, Jenny.
Sorry, your voice. I was not prepared.
She really can't talk.
Okay. I'm sorry. We had just talked, so I was not prepared for your voice to sound like that. It sounds great. It sounds great. um. Yeah.
She's
Well,
making fun
Rebecca.
of me. She's making fun of me.
I know. I told you her voice was jacked up.
I know, but I still wasn't ready. I'm sorry, friend. That sucks. Um.
You sound really sorry.
Oh, love you. Um. Yeah, I like this, Rebecca. I feel like this is so much about what I've been researching and writing for my book is what I'm calling the anatomy of a missionary and looking at how white women were set up as soft power for imperialism and the gender social role that white women serve abroad. I think we're experiencing now what Aimé Césaire calls the boomerang of imperialism. And so the roles that white women have taken on in the global south for 50 years plus, we're now seeing those higher levels of power, but it's not actually, it is levels of power, but it's mostly levels in proximity to male power that are still above those women. So they're always going to be on the sacrificial block whenever they need to be more than the white males in those positions would be, is what I think.
And you think it's still, you would call it a position of power.
I would call it a position of power so long as the performance is enacted to suit power. And I just read this really great article from Carrie Twigg about how Kristi Noem essentially got fired because she couldn't perform on TV well. And Trump is looking to continue to build his media empire and use propaganda to get people to continue to stand behind him, and she didn't perform well. And so it is power so long as you don't mess up, but the second that you don't align yourself with the way that power wants you to. So it's a really precarious power, I would say.
See, I would even say I don't think that's why she got fired. I would say that
I'm
and
back.
no and like there was no move to like find someone that's actually qualified who had a snowball's chance of performing well on the world stage. That's that's why I'm like, I don't think it is as simple as she didn't perform well. She was never gonna perform well, and you knew that when you picked her. And to me, I'm like, what's that choice actually about? right? Like it's the same thing now. I heard on the news recently that Erica Kirk just got appointed um, to be the chair of like the Air Force. I don't know, some committee, some task force that has something to do with the running of something to do with the Air Force. And all of my apologies for not getting this particular thing specifically right. But my thing is, what do you know about armed forces? Nothing. You don't like it's not like you're a former retired Air Force, whatever. You're not. You know nothing about any of this. So again, you're picking someone from jump, blonde-haired, blue-eyed female who is ill prepared from the very beginning for this very public face of a very like armed forces in the middle of a war, and your pick is Erica Kirk. Really? It like that's what's that setup about?
Do you have thoughts?
I'm just saying, like, you know, when it goes left, and it will, just like what happened with ICE, it's gonna take this turn for the worse that you won't actually recover from. Now you have a sacrificial lamb. You can say that somebody lost their job over this, and it makes it look like you are doing something to address a grave wrong, and you're not.
Yeah.
Right? And the sad part is that I saw something recently where Stephen Smith, that sports news guy, has made this comment about Kamala Harris, like, if I hear her say one more time, she told you so, right? And the thing that I think is interesting is like you do have these women, in this case a black woman, who actually has the credentials to 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 weigh in on something in proximity or juxtaposition to these white women who don't have the credentials. What is that about?
Well, again, I think it's part of that world and the role that white women have taken on, where it's this double bind, where I would say it is privileged and power, or maybe privileged without the power, but it
Mm-hmm.
is still sacrificial. And it always will be. And I think of um, like the qualifications, the men, many of them aren't qualified for the roles that they're taking on, but they're likely not going to be sacrificed in the same way that the women will. And I think part of that structure is the cult of domesticity, that white women represent this demure, trad wife aesthetic. So if you get these purity culture esque white women up there, it's gonna make sense in the psyche of people that have been conditioned in Christian nationalism to see this as innocent and pure and good, and not question the impacts that those women are actually having in the decisions and the actions that they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense in the case of Pam Bondi, particularly. And right, Danielle's going Epstein, Epstein, Epstein in the chat. It's about the third time. Now it's in all caps, right? um,
I feel I feel like I made you silence your voice, and I feel bad, Danielle. If you want to talk, please talk.
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense in the case of Pam Bondi in the role she took on in the Epstein hearing, and her just like, no, I won't turn around and look at these women. No, I will not. Like, no, yeah, and right in this in if in the American psyche, sh- that face, that voice, that body saying there's nothing to see here, right, is acceptable, then we don't have to have this conversation anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure anymore quite what to do with the Epstein files. Like there's a lot of energy around like all of this is a distraction from that. And I have a hard time in my mind trying to figure out what is in it that is so bad that you would start a war so the story doesn't come out. Right? Like what I can imagine is like, yeah, well, that isn't new and it won't surprise anybody. So what is there that I can't imagine? If that's if that's even a fair sort of frame for this.
I think people are getting lost in the binary of it's the Epstein files or it's something else. Like, I think it's absolutely that in part. And what is happening right now has been a fever dream of the Christian right since at least the 1970s. And um, apocalyptic readings of the book of Revelation and certain interpretations that have said if Israel takes over all of this land, then Jesus is going to come back, was the rhetoric I grew up with. After 9/11, it was like most exciting that war was breaking out in the Middle East because this meant that we were ushering in the kingdom of God. And so that is not part of it, right? When the military gets sent these letters saying that God has ordained Trump and that this is a holy war, essentially, what we have is nothing short of an enactment of Christian nationalism. And so it's not that the Epstein files aren't important. I think they absolutely are. And I think it's all within the context of think tanks and allegiances that have been in place for a very long time.
I agree. I particularly like the language around the binary thing. I agree with that. And not at all to minimize the Epstein files and what that means, right? And I just want to say that I want to say that on the record for anybody that hears this, right? There's no sense that we are minimizing the weight and the graphicness and the darkness and the the unthinkableness of what the Epstein files represent. Um, and it's scary to live in a world where that is perhaps not the worst thing that we are dealing with on any given day. Um, and so, yeah, and also to hear you say, Jenny, like what you grew up with uh, around this is what's gonna usher in the kingdom of God, like that. God help us all if the people or the brainchild behind this believes that kind of crazy, yeah, like, and it's not that I don't believe you, but good night.
I mean,
Please don't.
there are literally white TikTok influencers doing dances right now that says like oh no, World War III broke out, but here's me knowing Jesus is on his way, and it's just it is so disturbing. It's so disturbing.
And I mean, I don't really know this, but still, like years ago, I saw this Facebook post that was like a cartoon of like this angel that goes into the presence of God, and he says, they're down there making milk out of almonds again. And Jesus goes like, I literally gave them six animals that make milk. What are they doing with the nut? Right? I mean, like, what are you doing with the nuts? And so not to offend anybody that drinks, something other than cow's milk, but just there's a part of me that hears you and just has the sense as a person who identifies as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus Christ of the Bible, there's a part of me that goes like, he's got to be sitting in eternity going, Jesus Christ, what are they? I mean, like that is not what we're doing. It's not what we were ever doing. Yeah.
Like I don't think many people realize that their view of the end times is more based off of the book and movie series Left Behind than
Right.
it
That
is
part.
actually any
Yeah.
scripture.
Yeah. 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 It's left behind the one that was from the 70s because there was a couple I think after that were like updated versions of the same thing. But yeah.
I think the first Left Behind came out in like, well, the books, I don't know when the books came out. That's a good question. I know like the Kirk Cameron movie came out in like 2000-ish, I want to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, but there was a series in like the 70s that was like but yeah, whatever that whole thing, it's all the same plot, right? Which yeah. And I'm certain of one thing. There is no human on this earth now or who has ever walked this earth that has the capability to accurately interpret that. And so, whatever it is we think it is, I'm certain that we are incorrect about a substantial portion of whatever that is.
Yeah. I
It,
think
and
that
yeah, it's
the,
scary the extent to which people will sort of fall on their sword about the way I see it is the way that it is.
totally. And I think the closest we can get is like I really appreciate both Bart Ehrman has a book called I think it's called Armageddon, and Elaine Pagels has one called I think just Revelations, and they both look at the book of Revelation in the historical context. And it's like if I were to tell you Friday the 13th, you'd have an association with that because it culturally means something. And most of the language, if not all of the language in these books, means something in the culture. Like
Right, that's
666,
right. That's right.
it's literally the
That's right.
numerical reading of Caesar Nero.
That's
And
right.
anyone reading that would have known it has nothing to do with the COVID
That's
vaccine. It has nothing to do with
that's right.
barcodes.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Right. I think that the degree to which we are unaware, whether it's intentional or unintentional, that theology has so much culture in it, that right, that our theology is largely driven by cultural norms and our need as humans to resolve whatever tensions we find in our cultural norms. Like, and again, I say this as a person whose faith is deeply important to me, right? And also for me to come to any sort of alleged understanding of the text as if my cultural lens does not play a big part in how I understand it is both naive and foolish. Right? Of course it does. I'm a woman. I will come to anything I do and see as a woman, right? And the thought that somehow the way that I see it is not influenced by my gender is ridiculous. I am black. I am American. I'm all kinds of things, right? And the notion that those lenses do not impact everything I see and touch and taste and feel and hear is just naive. And somehow that we've adopted this ideology that you can come to theology with this sort of fabricated objectivity is a little scary, a lot scary.
And also the grandiosity to think that this book, this compilation of many, many books and letters written over 2,000 years ago, all of that was just a holding cell for it to apply directly to my experience right now in this particular part of the world. Like, how narcissistic do we have to be to think that that is like the epitome of everything that these sacred books
Right,
had to deal with?
right.
Got me
And
fired
you
up
know,
today.
again, I'm saying like at least I try to come to these things with this sense of there's going to be some things that I have to wrestle through. There will be some things that don't quite fit together and click together in this perfect little puzzle. There will be what is that thing that you say, Jenny, about like um this place of irreconcilability? Yeah, right. Like to think that you're not going to come to matters of faith and life and that you would somehow never have this place of that's kind I just don't know how to reconcile that. I'm not sure that it's reconcilable, at least for me in the finiteness of what I know today. To not know that, right? Yeah, narcissistic feels like a word that we might have to be talking about.
Yeah. And I think about uh the idea of cognitive dissonance actually comes from research of this alien cult that believed that aliens were going to come and abduct them. And there was people studying this cult. The aliens did not come and abduct them. And what the researchers theorized was these people were going to fade away then. They're going to leave the cult. And what they realized was that these people became even more evangelical about their cult. And the idea is that when we refuse to bear those irresolvable places, we need to make other people believe what we believe because that feels less distressing. And so I think about this even with the Epstein files is like I think it is so important. And my fear is that the cognitive dissonance is so strong with so many of these MAGA people that it won't
Mm.
matter what's in there. Like the biggest, I mean, we already know enough, right? Like, how do we not already
Right,
know enough with what we know? To me,
right.
it matters and it doesn't matter what else is in there because what is in there is already horrific enough
Yeah,
that this should be taken way
yeah.
more seriously than it
Oh
is.
yeah,
But
yeah,
my fear is that that cognitive dissonance is just going to continue to fracture and make people even more evangelical about
yeah.
the person that they think is ordained by God.
I agree with that. I mean, because the Epstein, it's not like the Epstein files is like this new thing, right? It's like there were dozens of things over the past however many years that Trump has been on the national stage, dozens of things, notwithstanding his comment about what he could do in broad daylight and what he has done in broad daylight to all, right? To and he said it like when you stand on the national stage and say, I've never asked God for forgiveness because I've never done anything that required forgiving, like there's enough data that is like, I saw that too, right? Like there's enough data just out of his own mouth, by his own admission, that we don't actually need any more than those three things, all of which we knew before he was elected the first time. I don't actually need any more than those three instances to know that this man and what he stands for is opposite of everything that I say that I stand for. Just, I don't need anything other than that, right? And so I do agree with you. It doesn't actually matter what else is uncovered, right? I think there is a certain subset of the American population that will remain loyal no matter what.
And it makes me think about again the precarity of that allegiance and safety with white women with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who as soon as she said, "Yeah, I think we should release all of the Epstein files," she was getting death threats, and she was no longer in these
Oh yeah, of
circles.
course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah. I mean that, and that goes all the way back to James Comey, right? There's a long list of people that if you do not prove to be a loyalist, you will pay a very high price, right? And that's not, yeah, I think of Liz Cheney, who took a stance against Trump, And same thing, right? Same sort of, you don't toe the party line, you will get voted off the island. Um, and I think that's a very dangerous place to be with an ideology, with a country, right? When we lose the capacity to self-police because any kind of introspection, any kind of accountability, any kind of regulation is viewed as treason, we're in a really dangerous spot. Danielle wrote in the chat that people are attracted to, I think she said assholes. It might have been asshat. I forgot what version of the word she was on when she wrote that. That's something I have thought about a lot too. Like it, America's sort of love affair with power and what feels to America like familiar power. Because for me, right, the choice in the election between the two candidates was more about you could choose this one candidate and actually decide to step away from standard operating procedure, to step away from societal norms and do something different, and reimagine power in a way that we have not allowed it to be imagined in the past. Or you can choose this familiar power that is telling you outright that it is violent, it is violative, it is dismissive, right? It's a long list of things. And it told you that about itself in broad daylight. This isn't even like it tried to conceal itself. It is not that it tried to lie and say that it was something else. It said outright what it was and what it would do. And America said, I'd rather have that. Right? Which feels to me like the person that chooses, when you have the option to walk away and you choose to stay in something that is abusive, right? Which is a very different circumstance than I don't actually have the power to get out. I don't actually have the resource to exit.
Yeah, Danielle said it feels sad. I feel that too. I'm thinking also of how many people didn't vote for whatever reason. And I'm thinking about Rosa Luxemburg, who wrote Reform or Revolution, and who argued that, like, over 100 years ago, the systems that have only gotten worse and bigger and more powerful can't be reformed. And of course, I don't assume everyone will agree with that, but her argument was that every attempt to reform only prolongs the system and therefore exacerbates the harm in the long term. That the only way forward is revolution and really dismantling the system. And I sit with that. I don't know. Like, there's this hopeful part of me that's like, no, we can vote our way out of this. And when I look at how voting has gone in the arc of the history of this country, it doesn't feel like it's trending towards things getting much better. But I don't know what it will take and what it would take for a type of revolution that could be a different imagination for what a revolution could be. Like, is there an imagination for a revolution that we haven't seen yet before? And what would that look like, or could that be? I don't know.
The thing that comes to my mind is Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book a while ago called "We Were 8 Years in Power" after Obama, after the two Obama administrations. And largely, he talks in that book about sort of the cyclical nature of both racism and power in this country, right? And this the rhythm of um, these advancements in terms of marginalization of people, and then this backlash, um, and how you can see this repetitive loop in history, right? And it's like there are these seasons of advancement, and then racism and sexism and misogyny and all of that will reinvent itself and reimagine itself and then reappear on the landscape, and then this very sort of violent pushback, that pushes back, to the best of its ability, this period of advancement, right? And so you can see that pretty clearly when you look at like the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, and this period of Reconstruction, the 2 or 3 years, 1866, 67, 68, where there's this significant advancement in the country of these people groups that have been marginalized and enslaved and all of this. And and then the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and the Black Codes, and Jim Crow, that pushes all of that back, right? And so the argument that he makes in the book is the idea that this period in American history is the backlash, um, to the Obama administration and to what the election of the first Black president actually represents, in the American trajectory. And so I say that because it gives me some hope that the cycle will continue, and there will again be this period of advancement. When, I don't know. I don't even want to imagine that. The time frame between, right? For how long will we live in this space of backlash?
I know this is like a simplistic way of saying that, but is it sort of it's like two steps forward, one step back, and so over time it will still hopefully continue to move forward despite the backlash.
But I mean, that's the hope of Dr. King, right? That's the point of the quote, that the arc of history will bend towards justice, right? I mean, that is the hope.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't suppose I've lived long enough to to have like a substantive firsthand account of if how true that is or not, is not. Um, but I do think that idea, that perspective, is something that allows the Black community to keep showing up. Right. There's a podcast conversation between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein, um, that started because Ezra Klein put an article out, I think in the Atlantic, about Charlie Kirk. And he was trying to paint this with some humanity and some integrity, this picture of the person of Charlie Kirk. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote something back publicly that was like, yeah, no, I don't agree with you. Um, and apparently these two men are friends, like outside of what they do professionally, they have struck up this friendship. And so there's this real intentionality around, can we try to have this conversation with each other? And so they get on a podcast together to try to have this conversation, and they're talking about and this all happens like in the week or so following Charlie Kirk's death. And so they're trying to have this conversation. And part of what they end up talking about is this: how do you actually come to a moment like this? is it useful at all to borrow this like long arc of historical lens, or is it more useful to try to stay in the present moment and come to these things with what we know in the present? And really, what I find fascinating is that Ezra Klein is like, I can't do the historical lens thing. There's too much weight, and it's too hard, and so I need to actually stay in this moment. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates is sort of saying like, I need to do the opposite. If I'm going to breathe through this, if I'm gonna, he wouldn't say these words. This is my paraphrase. But if I'm going to stay in my body, right, and I'm going to continue to do this work, I need this longer historical lens, or it feels like I can't breathe, right? And what I find fascinating in listening to this conversation is you watch them do this almost in slow motion and like miss, right? And they're trying really hard to actually connect, to actually find a way when they're on opposite sides of this argument from different cultures to try to figure out how do we meet in this moment and do some work together. And it just it's interesting to me like why and how each man is going, I need to come at this if from this particular vantage point because it's what allows me to actually engage this moment, right? And so Ezra Klein was like, I need to actually assign some humanity to Charlie Kirk, because if I don't like what that says about me or this country. Right. And 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 Ta-Nehisi Coates is like, and I need to put him in his historical context, or I don't like what that says about me or this country, right? I mean, so you can see them do. So that's a long-winded answer to like, maybe there is something to the God help us that it's one step back and two steps forward, right? That is the hope, I think, um, that I hear in the sort of Dr. King quote around the arc of history will bend towards justice. And also, it feels nearly impossible to catch that in the present moment.
It is a lot, a lot. Hmm. I think we're solving it here, though, so that's good.
All right. Right, right, right.
We can do what those fellas couldn't do.
Yeah.
Oh. Something about that I appreciate though is that like um I've been reading a book about the Gnostic Gospels that were considered heresy by the Orthodox Catholic Church, and most of them were destroyed except for some that they found along the way, and some of them they believe predated like books that made it into the New Testament. And what was really big in Gnostic traditions was that they would literally cast lots who would be the preacher, who would like do the prayer each time they came together. There was no hierarchy, and it was really based around community and diversity, which didn't work well for those who wanted to systematize Christianity and create orthodoxy. And so it just feels too painfully relevant to even what's happening now. And like as you talk about your faith, Rebecca, it's like that's a Christianity I can support and get behind. The like solidifying of Christian nationalistic ideology, I cannot. And so something about Ta-Nehisi and Ezra like disagreeing. I'm like, I think that's actually what we need more of, is more places where we can believe different, we can stay in our
Yes.
own culturally informed theology and psychology and relationships and try to find room for ourselves and one another in those, it's actually when it all attempts to become a monolith that it is really, really dangerous, and creates these power vacuums.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And it's actually something that I have wrestled with a little bit, coming out of an evangelical background, where there can be this sense of like, that your job or your assignment is to influence the world for the cause of Christ, right? And you can hear that as like wherever there are people doing something that is contrary to biblical standards, like it's my job to say so or to stop it, right? And I think something that sort of this moment invites us to wrestle with is the question of, is that actually what was happening in the Bible? Is that actually the assignment, right? And in some ways you have to say the answer is no, right? Because what you don't see is Jesus march into every institution, and demand that every institution bow and reform to whatever he said you were supposed to be doing in that moment. But as a matter of fact, whenever sort of the leaders of the day demanded that of him, his answer was like, that ain't what I'm here for. That's not what we're doing. Right. And so I do think, right, that somehow we have gotten off track with this notion that our assignment is to force American institutions to act in a manner consistent with with any one religious ideology. That's not actually the assignment of the believer of Christianity. And I probably lose my Christian card for saying that out loud, right? But I think in this moment it actually invites us to wrestle with what actually happened around the person of Jesus Christ in biblical times and what he was not doing. You didn't see him go into schools and demand prayer. You did not see him rewrite the pledge to the flag or any, like, he wasn't doing that. Right? Like that was not the point. Right? So it invites this question of like, why do we think that it's the point now? And why is there this level of deep offense if that isn't true in your everyday world? Like, where did you come up with the belief that that's how it's supposed to be?
I know you have to go in a minute, Jenny, but I think that's a excellent, excellent way to ask the people. Like, what do they think?
Mm.
Yeah. Christian, not Christian, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta jump off. Really, really good to be with you both.